Take a slow, easy breath and let your body settle into the quiet. Tonight we're going on a gentle journey, one carried on the soft winds of the Judean Desert, to explore the long, peaceful story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let your thoughts drift like grains of sand as we travel back in time, wandering across ancient cliffs, silent caves, and the patient landscape that kept remarkable writings hidden for centuries. Picture the desert at dusk. The air is warm, but the heat of the day is fading. The light softens across stone cliffs, turning them gold, then rose, then a muted violet as the sun sinks low. A stillness settles, deep, wide, and comforting. It's a place where time seems to stretch out, unhurried and open. For thousands of years this landscape remained steady. Winds passed through the valleys, carrying little stories of sand and sun. Wild goats walked the steep paths. Occasionally shepherds moved quietly along the edges of the cliffs, but mostly the desert simply breathed, and hidden in its breath were scrolls, texts written by steady hands long ago, texts wrapped lovingly, placed carefully, sealed in jars, carried into caves where the stone would cradle them. They waited through droughts, rains, eras, and civilizations. No one knew they were there. No one disturbed their long sleep. For centuries, these writings rested in the hush of the desert. Our story begins in the late 1940s. But before we reach that moment, let's linger in the ancient world where these scrolls were born. Imagine a small community living near the edge of the Dead Sea about 2,000 years ago. They lived simple lives, quiet routines shaped by prayer, study, and labor beneath the bright sun. Their days begin early with soft morning light filtering across their settlement. They fetch water, prepare food, share teachings, and write. Writing was sacred, careful, and deliberate. Ink was mixed with patience. Skins were prepared for parchment, and every word was shaped slowly. In the stillness of their work, scribes would sit near open doorways where desert air flowed gently. They dipped their reeds into ink and added line after line in neat, flowing script. These writings carried their thoughts, their hopes, their interpretations, and their devotion. Some were copies of scriptures. Some were commentaries. Some were hymns. Others were community rules or reflections meant to guide their lives. When the writings were completed, they were stored with reverence, rolled carefully, wrapped in linen, placed in clay jars, sealed to protect them from time and dust. These jars were sturdy, simple, and shaped to be carried easily. Eventually, the community faced conflict and uncertainty. As danger approached, they hid their writings in the cliffs tucked away in caves high above the valley floor. Perhaps they hoped to return one day. Perhaps they simply wanted these words, these pieces of themselves, to survive. And so the scrolls began their long sleep. Through centuries of storms and sunlight, silence and shifting sands, the scrolls remained, unseen, untouched, preserved by the cool darkness of the caves. Generation after generation passed, unaware of the treasure resting just beyond reach. And then, in 1947, everything changed. The sun was bright that morning. A young Bedouin shepherd walked through the rocky terrain near Qumran, guiding his goats across the slopes. His footsteps were steady. He scanned the hillside, listening for the familiar bells on the animals. one goat wandered away, slipping into the maze of stone and shadow. The boy climbed after it, calling softly. The cliffs rose above him, pale and silent. At one point he paused near a small cave opening, one of many dark pockets in the limestone. To check if the goat had hidden inside, he picked up a small stone and tossed it into the cave. What he heard next was not the sound of stone hitting earth. It was the crisp, unexpected sound of pottery breaking, a sharp crack echoing slightly in the cave's deep belly. Surprised, the boy stepped closer. The opening was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Curious and unafraid, he crawled inside. The air was cool, faintly dusty. Light filtered in softly, creating swirls of shadow on the cave walls. There on the ground, he saw tall clay jars, some broken, some intact. Inside one of the jars lay a wrapped scroll. He didn't yet know what it was. He didn't know how old it was or what it meant, but he sensed something unusual, something that didn't belong to ordinary days. He reached for one of the scrolls. Its surface looked dark, cracked slightly from age. The linen wrappings felt dry beneath his fingers. He carried the scroll out into the sunlight, blinking as the warm brightness met the ancient object. The parchment, hardened from centuries, held secrets older than he could imagine. The boy returned to his camp with the scroll, showing it to his relatives. They examined it, puzzled by its age and appearance. In the days that followed, more scrolls were retrieved from the cave carefully, though without yet understanding their value. Word spread slowly, then quickly. Scholars, dealers, and governments began to hear about the discovery. At first, no one believed the scrolls could be as old as they appeared. But when experts examined the writing, the style of script, the type of parchment, the stitching, they realized the scrolls were ancient, far older than any manuscripts known at the time. And suddenly, the quiet caves of Qumran became the center of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Teams arrived with notebooks, lanterns, brushes, and careful hands. The desert, once undisturbed, filled with gentle footsteps and murmured voices as scholars explored each cave. They climbed high cliffs, peered into openings, and uncovered more jars, more scrolls, more fragments. Each scroll carried a voice from the past. Some contained books of the Hebrew Bible, written long before the earliest known copies. Others held community rules, describing how people lived together, how they prayed, how they kept order in their daily routines. Some scrolls contained poetry, gentle hymns, praising the quiet beauty of the natural world, the stars, the steady rhythms of life. The scrolls were fragile. Some crumbled at the slightest touch, their edges peeling like dried leaves. Scholars used soft brushes, inhaling slowly, moving delicately to preserve every fragment. They arranged pieces across cloth-covered tables, fitting them together like puzzles, each curve, each letter a clue to the full story. Meanwhile, the desert watched in calm silence. The wind flowed across the cliffs, carrying with it the soft sounds of careful hands at work. Evening light settled gently across the excavations. Lanterns glowed in the dusk, creating pools of warm light where scholars studied late into the night. The scrolls unveiled a world that felt both distant and intimately human, a community full of dedication, reflection, and quiet discipline. Their words, preserved against all odds, spoke with clarity despite the centuries. Tonight, as we drift deeper into this story, imagine standing outside one of those caves at twilight. The sky above you is wide and calm. The air cools slowly as the sun disappears behind the distant mountains. In this peaceful moment, you can almost feel the quiet wisdom held inside the cliffs, waiting to be rediscovered. As night settles over the Judean Desert, the air grows cooler, carrying the steady rhythm of distant winds. The cliffs stand quiet, their shapes outlined softly beneath a sky filled with stars. Lanterns flicker at the cave entrances, glowing like small, gentle beacons against the vast darkness. Scholars gather their tools and notes, speaking quietly as they prepare for another day of patient discovery. The work is slow, almost meditative. Each morning begins with careful steps along rocky paths, each one leading to a cave that might hold another secret. These caves, once unnoticed and untouched, now feel alive with possibility. The scholars pause before entering, letting their eyes adjust to the dimness as they step inside. Inside the caves, the air is still almost heavy with age. Dust floats in soft patches of sunlight. Every sound seems to echo in gentle layers. The stone walls have seen centuries pass, yet they preserve their coolness and calm. And nestled within these shadows lie the traces of a long-vanished world. In some caves, tall jars stand upright, undisturbed. Their lids remain sealed with ancient care. In others, the jars have shattered, scattering fragments across the ground. Parchment pieces lie nearby, some curled tightly, others stretched thin from time. Scholars kneel beside them with quiet reverence, brushing away loose sand with soft strokes. Unwrapping a scroll requires immense patience. The parchment resists movement, its surface stiff like dried leaves after winter. Hands move slowly, no sudden motions, no pressure. Every inch unwrapped reveals text shaped in flowing lines, words echoing the thoughts of people who lived, worked, and believed 2,000 years earlier. The script is beautiful, rhythmic, and consistent. Some scrolls preserve entire books, others only fragments of hymns or reflections, and still others offer glimpses into the daily lives of the community that wrote them. Each discovery feels like a voice reaching out gently from across millennia. As the scrolls are unrolled, scholars note the differences in ink, the subtle shifts in handwriting, the slight variations in line spacing. These small details reveal the personalities of the scribes, some with meticulous hands, others with slightly quicker strokes. Even within the same tradition, each writer left a quiet signature in the form of their craft. Outside, the sun rises steadily, warming the rocky landscape. The Dead Sea glistens in the distance, its still surface shining like a piece of glass. The settlement of Qumran rests below the cliffs, its ancient foundations preserved in soft outlines. Stone rooms, storage areas, ritual baths, and study spaces give clues to how this community once lived. Life at Qumran would have been structured, contemplative, and calm. The people likely rose early, working together to prepare food, tend to daily tasks, and study sacred texts. Their settlement included workshops for pottery, writing rooms for scribes, and open courtyards where teachings were shared. Every day followed a rhythmed sunrise prayers, quiet meals, periods of study, and moments of reflection under the vast desert sky. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal much about this community, though not everything. Some scrolls describe rules and expectations, guidelines for conduct, methods for resolving disputes, instructions for ritual purity. Others contain apocalyptic writings, visions of a future change, expressed in symbolic language. And many scrolls simply echo the longing for peace, justice, and order in a world that often felt uncertain. Back in the caves, the scholars continue their delicate task. They catalog each fragment, placing them carefully on cloth-lined tables. Some fragments are tiny, barely larger than a thumbprint. Others stretch several feet long. Each one holds a piece of the puzzle, offering a connection to the broader story. The process of piecing fragments together is slow but deeply satisfying. Scholars match edges by examining the shapes of tears, the flow of ink, and the curvature of parchment. When two pieces align perfectly, it feels almost like hearing a musical note resolve softly. One fragment clicks into another, forming a line of text unseen for centuries. The soundscape is gentle, the brushing of sand, the quiet shifting of papers, the soft murmur of readings spoken under breath. Occasionally a faint breeze slips into the cave, stirring dust motes in the light. The atmosphere is calm enough that even the smallest sound feels amplified, like the turning of a page or the sigh of a lantern flame. As the discoveries multiply, news begins to spread across the world. Archaeologists, historians, linguists, and theologians grow eager to examine scrolls. Letters are written, meetings arranged, and expeditions formed. But for now, the work at Qumran remains intimate, a handful of dedicated scholars moving slowly through the desert's quiet heart. On certain evenings, the team gathers outside the caves, sitting on flat stones while the sky deepens into a deep indigo. They share their findings in soft voices, comparing scripts, interpreting fragments, and discussing possibilities. The desert cools around them, bringing a peaceful stillness that wraps gently around their conversations. Imagine sitting with them. The air is wonderfully calm. The stone beneath you still radiates a bit of warmth from the day. Far off, you can hear the faint rustle of the desert wind slipping between cliffs. Above you, stars appear one by one, clear, sharp, beautiful in the dry air. The scholars lean over a lantern, unrolling a fragment they found earlier that morning. The writing speaks of gratitude, humility, and the importance of community. The words feel timeless, offering comfort even now, separated by 2,000 years. You listen as the text is read aloud in a soft, steady voice. The meaning flows around you like a warm tide. Later, the scholars reflect on how improbable the discovery was. If the boy's goat had not wandered away, if he had thrown a stone in a different direction, if he had passed the cave without noticing it, the scrolls might still be silent in the darkness. It is a reminder of how chance, patience, and curiosity sometimes work together to uncover something extraordinary. As the night deepens, you walk quietly toward the edge of the cliffs. Below, the Dead Sea reflects the moonlight in a long, still shimmer. The air smells faintly of salt and stone. The desert stretches endlessly beyond the horizon, vast, open, and timeless. You feel the weight of history, not heavy, but serene, like a quiet presence that has always been here. The next morning, as sunlight warms the cliffs again, the work continues. More caves are explored. Some contain scrolls, others only stones and old animal droppings. But each cave carries its own character, its own silence, its own memory of time passing slowly. When a cave reveals new scrolls, the excitement is gentle but unmistakable. The scholars speak in hushed tones, their movements precise and respectful. They know how rare these discoveries are. They know how easily ancient parchment can crumble. And they know they are holding something that connects the present to the distant past. The scrolls will eventually travel far from these caves. They will be studied in laboratories, photographed carefully, preserved in climate-controlled rooms. They will be examined by experts around the world. But the heart of the discovery, the quiet awe, the soft light on ancient ink, the feeling of stepping into a story older than entire empires belongs to this desert. And tonight, in this slow, calming narrative, it belongs to you too. You stand in the deep stillness of the Judean Desert, letting your breath slow to match the rhythm of the wind. The cliffs glow in the afternoon sun. The caves hold stories that waited patiently for centuries, and the world feels soft, ancient, and peaceful. Morning returns gently to the desert, arriving not with noise or urgency, but with a slow brightening of the sky. The cliffs shift from deep blue to pale lavender, then to a soft gold, as the first rays of sunlight stretch across the landscape. The stillness is comforting, as if the land wakes up with a long, peaceful sigh. The scholars begin their day much like the ones before, quiet movements, shared nods, and a calm sense of purpose. They drink water warmed by the morning sun, gather their brushes and notebooks, and prepare to return to the caves. You walk with them again, feeling the steady rhythm of the desert beneath your feet. Today they plan to explore a cave deeper within the cliffs, one that requires a careful climb up narrow, uneven steps carved naturally by centuries of wind. The ascent is slow, but the view grows more beautiful with every step. The Dead Sea sparkles far below, mirroring the soft morning sky. The distant hills glow warmly, their outlines gentle against the horizon. When you reach the cave entrance, the air flowing out is cool and quiet, carrying a faint scent of old stone. The space beyond the opening is dark, but not intimidating, just still, like a room untouched for far too long. The scholars light a lantern, and its soft glow begins to paint the cave walls with warm amber tones. Inside, the floor is uneven, scattered with small stones and patches of sand. Near the back, partially hidden by a curve in the wall, sits a tall jar, still sealed. Its lid shows signs of age cracks spreading like tiny rivers, but it remains whole. The scholars approach it slowly. No one speaks. The moment feels fragile, as if the cave itself is holding its breath. With gentle hands, they brush away the sand gathered around the jar's base. A thin cloud of dust rises, swirling softly in the lamplight. One scholar examines the seal, noting the way it was applied by hands long gone. It is a simple seal, but it protected what rested inside for centuries. When they lift the lid, there is a long silence, then a quiet exhale of awe. Inside the jar lies a scroll wrapped in linen that has yellowed with time. The wrapping is delicate, but intact. They lift it slowly, supporting its weight with both hands. The parchment underneath feels firm but aged, like something that has waited patiently for its story to be shared. You watch as they place the scroll on a padded board and begin the delicate process of unwrapping it. Every movement is slow. The linen peels back in thin, brittle layers. Beneath it, the scroll emerges darkened by time, but beautifully preserved. As they unroll the first few inches, lines of script become visible. The letters are bold, steady, and remarkably clear. It is a moment of deep connection, as if the writer's hand still lingers in the strokes of ink. One scholar begins to read softly. The text appears to be a hymn song of gratitude, speaking of creation, light, and the quiet wisdom found in solitude. The words flow gently through the cave, filling the space with a peaceful presence. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The ancient hymn blends with the sound of your breath, the flicker of the lantern, and the muffled echo of the desert wind at the cave entrance. It is a moment suspended between centuries. As they unroll more of the scroll, additional lines appear, poetic reflections that speak of humility and the calm found in seeking truth. Even though the ink has faded, the meaning feels alive. The scholars exchange soft glances, recognizing the significance of what they've found. Later, they take photographs and detailed notes. They gently clean small areas of the parchment, removing loose dust that has settled over the centuries. The scroll reveals more of its message slowly, like a flower opening in soft light. By midday, the scroll has been documented as much as safely possible. The scholars rewrap it carefully and place it in a protective case, ensuring it will be preserved as they continue their studies. The jar has also documented its shape, texture, and inscriptions offering additional clues about the time and place from which it came. You step outside while they work, breathing in the warm desert air. The sun hangs high, and everything shimmers slightly beneath its brightness. The Dead Sea appears almost metallic, reflecting the light in one continuous band. The cliffs below cast long shadows, creating beautiful patterns on the dusty ground. As you walk along the ridge, you imagine the scribes who once lived here, people who walked these same paths, breathed this same air, and looked out at this. Their hands shaped the scrolls now being uncovered. Their thoughts filled the words now being read for the first time in 2,000 years. It is humbling, and yet comforting. A reminder that human voices can endure far longer than anyone imagines. In the afternoon, the team moves to another cave, a smaller one, but promising. The entrance is narrow, forcing everyone to crouch as they enter. The space inside is cool, with a faint, damp scent. The floor here is covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched by footprints until now. The scholars begin to explore the cave walls, checking for hidden jars or tucked-away fragments. It doesn't take long for one of them to find something unusual, a small niche in the wall, carved or shaped intentionally. Inside it rests a fragment of parchment, folded neatly. Even after 2,000 years, the fold is visible, like a gentle crease preserved in time. The parchment is fragile, but the ink remains strong. The scholars unfold it slowly, revealing a short passage written in flowing script. The text appears to be a reflection on patience, a reminder to remain steady, even when the world feels uncertain. The words feel timely, even now. You listen as a scholar reads them aloud in a soft voice. The passage seems to resonate in the cave, settling into the space like a quiet blessing. Outside, the afternoon sky shifts from bright gold to a deeper amber. The heat eases slowly, replaced by a refreshing breeze. You can hear the distant call of desert birds and the faint rustle of wind weaving through the cliffs. By evening, the team gathers outside the caves to rest. They sit beneath the shifting light, surrounded by the warm colors of dusk. Tools are set aside, notes organized, and the day's findings are laid out carefully for review. One of the scholars shares insights into the hymn discovered earlier. Another discusses the small passage found in the niche. Together, they piece together ideas, forming a broader understanding of the community that created these writings. Their voices are low and steady, blending gently with the soft sounds of the desert night beginning to form around you. As darkness deepens, stars appear again, bright and clear against the vast sky. The scholars eventually retire to their tents, leaving the cliffs quiet once more. You remain for a moment longer, listening to the stillness. You imagine the ancient scribes walking this same land under the same stars. They must have felt the same serenity, the same awe, the same humbling sense of vastness. Their scrolls, filled with contemplation and devotion, were shaped in this timeless quiet. Now, as you prepare for rest, you feel the same calm settling through you. The desert, the scrolls, the long echo of history, it all weaves together into a peaceful tapestry. And the story continues, slow, steady, and deeply calming. The desert morning arrives with a soft golden glow. Light spills gently across the cliffs, stretching long shadows over the winding paths that lead up toward the caves. The air is cool at first, carrying the faint scent of salt drifting from the Dead Sea. Everything feels unhurried and peaceful, as if the land itself understands the quiet importance of the work happening here. The scholars begin their day with calm movements. They gather their brushes, cloths, lamps, and notebooks. There is no rush. Every step is deliberate, steady, and careful. Their goal is not speed, but preservation. Not discovery for excitement's sake, but discovery with respect. They know the desert has protected these scrolls for centuries. Now it is their turn to be just as gentle. You walk with them toward another cave high on the cliffs. The path is narrow, shaped by centuries of wind. Small stones shift beneath your feet, making soft sounds in the morning quiet. When you reach the cave entrance, the air flowing out feels cool, almost refreshing compared to the growing warmth behind you. Inside, the darkness feels deep at first. The scholars light a lantern, and an amber glow slowly spreads across the walls, revealing an uneven ceiling of ancient stone. The light flickers gently, creating a soothing dance of shadows. In this cave, the smell of dust and old earth fills the air. You can almost sense the age of the space, as if it carries the memory of thousands of silent years. As the team explores deeper, one of them notices the broken remains of a clay jar near a corner. Another kneels beside it, brushing away loose dirt to reveal fragments of parchment, tucked beneath a thin layer of sand. The fragments are delicate. Each one is lifted slowly, then placed on a smooth board lined with soft cloth. Even the slightest pressure could cause the edges to crumble, so the scholars touch the parchment only with tools designed for fragile artifacts. Their motions are careful, almost tender. Piece by piece, the fragments are laid out before you. Some contain letters still visible in elegant strokes. Others hold only faint marks, like whispers fading into silence. The scholars examine them with thoughtful eyes, noting the curves of the script, the thickness of the ink, and the shape of each fragment. Every detail offers a clue. As more pieces are uncovered, a subtle picture forms. These fragments appear to belong to a larger scroll, perhaps a commentary, perhaps a hymn. The scholars lean close, comparing the edges to fragments found in other caves. Their voices remain hushed, as if they do not want to disturb the ancient words. Outside the cave, time continues its gentle rhythm. The sun climbs higher, warming the cliffs. The sky above the Dead Sea becomes a bright blue, shimmering with heat. Yet inside, the air stays cool and calm, making it easy to lose track of hours. Here, you feel connected to a different time, a slower, quieter one. Throughout the day, more discoveries appear. A jar lid with markings etched into its surface. A linen wrapping still clinging to a thin sliver of parchment. A bundle of fragments so fragile that they must be moved with tools finer than the width of a hair. Every new piece feels like another soft heartbeat from the past. One scholar pauses to read a line aloud, just a small portion of text that has become clear enough to interpret. The words describe a moment of reflection. The desert is a place of stillness where the mind can quiet and hear its own depths. Hearing the words spoken in the cave feels almost like listening to the writer's voice carried across generations. As the afternoon continues, you step outside to breathe the open air. The desert around you glows with warm color. Small shrubs cling to life in the sand. Birds glide effortlessly across the sky. The Dead Sea stretches wide and still, reflecting sunlight like polished glass. In the distance, you can see the remains of the settlement below stone outlines of rooms, workshops, and gathering spaces. It's easy to imagine the people of the community walking between these buildings, their thoughts focused on study, work, and devotion. Their lives were simple, but filled with purpose. Their writings, now found in the caves, were the quiet thread that connected their world. You close your eyes and imagine a day in their lives. Morning prayers, simple meals eaten together, time spent copying texts in a workshop filled with soft murmurs and the rhythmic scratch of reeds moving across parchment. Evenings spent outdoors, watching stars emerge across a sky untouched by city lights. The scrolls bring us closer to them, not through loud stories or dramatic events, but through small moments of insight preserved with care. Their words reveal a desire for calm, order, and meaning. They reveal a longing for understanding and a belief in something larger than themselves. They reveal a community that valued silence as much as speech, contemplation as much as action. When you return to the cave, the scholars have made progress. Several fragments have been laid together, forming larger portions of text. Some lines are nearly complete. The ink, though faded, still carries its ancient rhythm. Each letter stands as it was written, patient and unchanging. The team moves with focused calmness, turning pages in notebooks, measuring fragment edges, comparing shapes. Their quiet collaboration feels like a gentle ritual, one held together by curiosity and respect. No one rushes. No one raises their voice. It is a space of concentration wrapped in peace. The sun begins to set again, casting the desert in warm shades of amber and red. The cliffs glow like embers. The Dead Sea reflects the sky, turning from gold to rose to deep indigo. The desert breeze grows cooler, brushing lightly against your skin. The scholars pack their materials with care, wrapping each fragment in protective layers before placing them into containers designed to keep them safe. Lanterns are lit as twilight deepens, bathing the cave entrance in soft light. You stand outside once more, listening to the last sounds of the day, the distant hum of insects, the gentle sigh of the wind, the faint rustling of cloth as tools are put away. The peacefulness of the landscape feels boundless, as if the desert itself is whispering its approval of the slow, patient work happening within it. Later, after the team returns to camp, they gather to review the day's findings. They sit beneath a clear night sky, stars arranged in patterns that the ancient scribes once looked upon too. The scholars speak softly, tracing lines of text with their fingers, sharing interpretations and insights. One of the fragments they examined describes a moment of gratitude for light, for community, for the chance to seek meaning in a world that can often feel uncertain. Hearing these words now under the same sky those ancient writers must have seen feels deeply comforting. The desert night stretches wide around you. The warmth of the day fades into a cool, gentle quiet. The cliffs stand silent and strong, as if guarding the stories they once protected. The peacefulness of this moment flows over you like a soft blanket, calming your breath, slowing your thoughts, inviting you into deeper rest. Tomorrow more caves will be explored. More fragments will be found. More pieces of the ancient world will rise slowly from the dust. And each discovery, no matter how small, will add to the long, beautiful tapestry woven from the past to the present. For now, you breathe deeply and let the calm of the night settle inside you. The story continues, but there is no need to hurry. Everything unfolds gently in its own time. The morning rises slowly over the Judean Desert, casting soft light across the cliffs and the shimmering surface of the Dead Sea. The air is cool, carrying a faint whisper of wind through the narrow valleys. You feel the calm of the desert seep into your bones as the scholars prepare for another day of careful exploration. Their footsteps are quiet, deliberate, and synchronized with the rhythm of the land. Today, the team focuses on cataloging and studying the scrolls already retrieved. Each fragment is examined meticulously. Scholars measure, photograph, and record every detail: the shape of the parchment, the style of the letters, the subtle marks of the scribe's hand. Even the smallest curve or stroke can reveal invaluable information about its origin, age, and meaning. They work in soft collaboration, speaking in hushed tones, their words deliberate and gentle. Outside the caves, the desert remains calm, as if holding its breath in respect for the slow unfolding of human history. Dust motes drift in beams of morning sunlight, shimmering like tiny stars hovering over the work tables. Some fragments are joined together with painstaking care. The process is slow, almost ritualistic. Each new piece that fits into place feels like a heartbeat returning across time. Scholars lean close to the boards, matching edges, comparing ink, and whispering observations. Every match is met with quiet satisfaction. As the day progresses, attention turns to translation. Scholars carefully begin interpreting the ancient Hebrew and Aramaic texts. The letters, some nearly 2 millennia old, hold the rhythms and patterns of voices long past. The language is alive, carrying not only meaning, but also a subtle echo of the scribe's hand, the flow of thought and the quiet dedication that went into each word. Some texts are familiar books that later became part of the Hebrew Bible. Others are completely new, offering glimpses into beliefs, practices, and reflections previously unknown. The writings provide insight into community life, rules for shared living, instructions for ritual purity, prayers, and reflections on the natural world. The scholars pause often, leaning back to absorb the rhythm of the language, allowing the calm and order of the words to settle in their minds. Each fragment read aloud creates a gentle connection across centuries. The desert, cliffs, and quiet caves seem to listen along. By afternoon, the work turns to preservation. Fragile scrolls are carefully wrapped, stabilized, and stored under controlled conditions. Moisture and temperature are monitored meticulously. Every precaution is taken to ensure that these writings, which have survived millennia, continue to endure. The scholar's hands move slowly, their touch respectful, aware that a single misstep could damage centuries of history. News of the discovery spreads beyond the desert. Scholars from around the world take notice. Letters are exchanged, and some researchers travel to Qumran to study the scrolls directly. Debates begin in quiet rooms and lecture halls far from the cliffs. Some discussions are gentle, focused on translation accuracy, script styles, and historical context. Others are more animated, reflecting the excitement of uncovering previously unknown writings. Amid these discussions, the desert remains serene. The cliffs hold their silent watch. The scrolls, resting safely in protective cases or carefully unrolled for study, seem to exhale softly, their secrets shared gradually, patiently. As evening approaches, the team reflects on the day's progress. Lanterns are lit inside the caves, casting a warm glow over work tables. Shadows stretch across walls, textured with ancient limestone. The desert outside darkens, the air cooling gently, carrying the subtle sounds of night, distant birds, the rustle of shrubs, and the whisper of the wind through the cliffs. One of the scholars reads aloud a fragment discovered the previous week, a set of instructions for community life. The words describe care for neighbors, quiet meditation, and devotion to study. Their rhythm is steady and deliberate. The echo of centuries past seems to wrap the listeners in a calm embrace. The team leaves the cave gradually, each step measured. Outside, the stars emerge across the vast sky, bright and clear. The Dead Sea reflects the moonlight, a ribbon of silver in the distance. You pause, listening to the soft hush of the desert night, feeling the connection between the present and the distant past. In the following weeks, work continues steadily. Scholars travel to libraries and archives comparing the scrolls to known manuscripts. They begin piecing together the historical timeline of the Qumran community. Discussions range from careful examinations of ink composition to the precise shapes of letters. Each small detail helps reconstruct a picture of life 2,000 years ago. Some scrolls reveal apocalyptic visions, symbolic language describing hope and expectation. Others are more practical, focusing on daily life rules for eating, working, studying, and interacting with neighbors. Through these texts, the humanity of the community becomes apparent. Their desire for order, meaning, and connection resonates across time. As the desert days pass, the scholars develop routines. Morning light brings new fragments to examine. Afternoon warmth accompanies study and translation. Evenings are spent reviewing notes beneath the deepening twilight. Every day blends seamlessly into the next, a gentle rhythm of work, reflection, and care. In this calm, repetitive flow, the scrolls slowly reveal their stories. Each unrolled fragment adds texture to a larger picture of the past. The words, once hidden, now reach across millennia, speaking softly to anyone willing to listen with patience and respect. By the time winter begins to touch the desert, the collection of scrolls has grown substantial. Scholars carefully organize the fragments, beginning to assemble larger texts. It is painstaking work. Some scrolls take months to reconstruct, while others require years of collaboration between multiple experts. Throughout all this, the desert remains unchanged in its serenity. The cliffs stand firm, the Dead Sea glimmers silently, and the caves hold their secrets patiently. Each new fragment discovered is a reminder of the slow, enduring persistence of human thought and devotion. The work at Qumran continues into the night. Lanterns flicker in caves, casting shadows across walls etched with natural. Scholars whisper interpretations, noting how each fragment adds to the story of an ancient community devoted to study, ritual, and reflection. Outside, the desert wind sighs through the cliffs, a gentle accompaniment to the careful unfolding of centuries old. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine standing quietly in the desert, feeling the cool air on your skin, listening to the distant ripple of water along the Dead Sea, and letting the calm of history wash over you. The scrolls, once hidden, now share their quiet wisdom, slowly, gently, patiently. Soft morning light settles over the desert once again. The cliffs rise in quiet stillness, and the Dead Sea glows beneath the gentle sky. The scholars return to their work with the same unhurried rhythm, carrying notebooks, brushes, and careful anticipation. Every day feels like a continuation of the one before, a steady unfolding of history whispered into the present. The tables inside the temporary research shelter are arranged neatly. Fragments lie on soft cloth, each protected with small weights to prevent curling. Magnifying lenses rest beside them, along with thin brushes used to remove dust without disturbing the ancient material. The scholars begin with a moment of silence, simply observing the fragments before touching them. It is as if they are greeting old voices awakened from a long rest. Today, the focus turns toward the earliest stages of publication. Scholars start organizing which texts can be safely reproduced, photographed, and copied for wider study. Even this process is slow and deliberate. Each photograph requires perfect lighting, even exposure, and absolute stillness to ensure every letter is preserved in exquisite detail. The sound of the camera shutter echoes softly inside the shelter. Outside, the desert heat gradually rises, but the air remains peaceful. Shadows shift along the cliffs, stretching and contracting in patient cycles. The scholars continue preparing their notes, comparing translations and reviewing earlier drafts. Every word must be handled with utmost precision. As they work, a soft hum fills the shelter, the sound of quiet concentration and gentle discussion. Some fragments are assigned to specialists with deep knowledge of ancient scripts. They trace the curves of the letters, noting variations that reveal the scribe's habits, an unusual flourish, a slight compression of space, an ink stroke heavier on one side. These subtle signs help identify which fragments belong to which scroll, and sometimes even whether they were written by the same scribe. In the afternoon, the scholars gather around a larger fragment containing a passage of poetry. The lines speak of renewal, of waiting for light to return, of trusting in gentle order even in difficult times. The rhythm is soothing, like breathing. As the translation unfolds aloud, the shelter fills with a quiet sense of reverence. The words feel as fresh as if they were written only yesterday, even though they traveled through centuries to reach this moment. Beyond the shelter, the Dead Sea shimmers in the sun. Its surface reflects the sky in slow, changing colors from pale blue to soft silver. The desert winds move gently, carrying fine grains of sand that dance softly across the stone. The landscape feels timeless, perfectly suited to the careful pace of the work taking place within it. Later, two scholars review a scroll that contains community rules. The text describes a structured life of discipline, study, and shared responsibility. It details the expectations of each member, how to treat one another with patience, how to eat meals in calm silence, how to dedicate time each day to reflection. The scholars read the lines quietly, noting how surprisingly familiar these rhythms feel, even in the modern world. At sunset, the researchers step outside, stretching their legs and breathing in the cooling air. The sky deepens slowly, moving from gold to rose to quiet blue. The cliffs cast long shadows that soften the landscape. It feels like the desert itself is preparing for rest, matching their own gradual shift toward evening calm. As night settles, the team gathers to discuss their progress. Pages of notes lie between them, illuminated by lantern light. They speak softly, reviewing translations, comparing interpretations, and gently debating nuances and meaning. No one rushes. Every insight is handled with thoughtful care. The desert night feels vast around them, holding their voices like faint echoes in the stillness. In the days that follow, international interest continues to grow. Scholars from distant countries write letters filled with curiosity. Some travel long distances to join the excavation and study, bringing new expertise and fresh perspectives. Together, they create an environment of shared discovery, united by fascination with these fragile and ancient writings. Inside the caves, exploration continues. New chambers are examined, though many yield only pottery, tools, or remnants of daily life. Still, each finding contributes to the larger understanding of the community that once lived here. Archaeologists brush away layers of sand, discovering footprints of habitation, simple hearths, storage areas, and narrow passageways shaped by hands long gone. Each new discovery helps contextualize the scrolls. The researchers begin forming a clearer image of the people who created them, individuals devoted to study, living simply in the desert, seeking clarity and discipline. Their writings reflect a longing for balance, order, and a sense of peace within the vastness of the world. One afternoon, a large table is dedicated entirely to piecing together a scroll written in beautiful, flowing script. The fragments are laid out like parts of a quiet puzzle. Scholars lean in, adjusting small sections, aligning edges, and comparing ink tones. The work is patient, requiring deep focus and the ability to sit with uncertainty. Sometimes pieces fit perfectly. Other times they rest aside until their place becomes clear. Slowly the scroll takes shape, revealing a text filled with reflection and guidance. It speaks of humility, patience, and the value of gentle awareness. Each line feels like a soft reminder to honor the present moment, to listen, and to remain open to quiet understanding. The scholars pause as they translate, letting the calm wisdom settle through the room. As weeks pass, the caves become familiar companions. The hum of study grows steady. Even the desert animals seem accustomed to the presence of the researchers' birds landing near the shelter, occasional foxes pausing at a distance. The desert remains a vast, peaceful participant in the unfolding story. When evening arrives again, the group walks along the ridge, overlooking the Dead Sea. The water below glows softly in the moonlight, stretching toward the horizon like a silver ribbon. The sky is clear, filled with countless stars. Each star feels like an ancient companion to the scrolls, having watched the desert through countless ages. The scholars move slowly, speaking little. The serenity of the landscape encourages silence. They reflect on their work, on the patience required, and on the gift of being able to handle these fragile echoes of the past. Late into the night, lanterns glow inside the research tent. Notes are organized, translations reviewed. A few scholars gently pack fragments into protective cases for transport to laboratories with more advanced equipment. There, the scrolls will be analyzed with new methods: infrared photography, chemical testing, and careful preservation techniques. The desert wind continues its soft rustle outside. It moves through the cliffs like a long, steady breath. The scholars pause often, listening to the quiet, letting it guide their pace. The connection between the ancient words and the present moment remains strong, as if time folds gently around the work. As Part 6 draws toward its quiet close, you imagine yourself once again standing at the entrance of one of the caves. The air is cool. The scent of desert stone surrounds you. Inside, the faint echoes of ancient scribes seem to linger, whispering their thoughts, their hopes, their devotion to meaning and reflection. You take a slow breath and let the calm settle into your chest. The scrolls, still unfolding their story, continue to guide you gently through the ancient landscape, offering not only history but also a soft, enduring peace. The sun rises quietly over the desert again, spreading gentle warmth across the cliffs. The research site stirs in the soft early light. Scholars step out of their tents, moving slowly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, preparing themselves for another day of quiet, deliberate work. The air is cool and clear. The desert carries a peaceful stillness that wraps around everything, forming a calm foundation for the hours ahead. As they gather, the conversation turns toward a new phase of the project, the growing interest of the wider world. Word of the scrolls has traveled quickly. Newspapers have begun printing brief articles, hinting at the significance of the discovery. Scholars in distant universities prepare letters requesting access. The world is beginning to lean toward Qumran, curious and eager, but not yet aware of the delicate balance that must be preserved. Inside the research shelter, tables are newly arranged. Large boards hold carefully reconstructed sections of scrolls, placed deliberately under glass. Lamps illuminate each fragment, creating small pools of warm light. Here, the scholars review their latest work, ensuring accuracy in the transcriptions and translations. Their voices, when they speak, are low and gentle, blending with the soft hum of desert wind. In the early hours, one scholar reads from a recently reconstructed text. The words flow slowly, reflections on humility, meditation, and the steady nature of time. The group listens, absorbing the quiet wisdom. The text feels like a living presence in the room, offering peace to those who handle it with care. By mid-morning, attention turns toward organizing scrolls for transfer to more secure facilities. This shift introduces new challenges. Boxes must be lined with special materials, fragile edges supported, and temperatures monitored. Every movement is slow and deliberate. No one rushes. They know the scrolls have lasted 2,000 years, and they intend to keep them safe long into the future. Beyond the research station, international interest continues to build. Plans are made for some scrolls to travel to Jerusalem, where additional experts can perform preservation work. The scholars discuss how best to transport them wrapped in soft layers, supported by custom cases, protected from shaking or compression. The process resembles a ritual of respect, as if escorting sacred relics through the desert. Meanwhile, debates begin to emerge across academic circles. Some scholars argue for rapid publication, believing the world deserves immediate access to these ancient writings. Others insist on caution, emphasizing the need to fully understand the context before releasing interpretations. The discussions are calm but persistent, reflecting the excitement and responsibility that accompanies such discoveries. Later in the afternoon, the team gathers near the entrance of Cave 4, where many fragments were found. They study the shape of the cave, tracing the natural shelves carved by ancient water flow. The shadows stretch gently across the ground, creating soft patterns of light and darkness. Here, researchers reflect on the people who once stored their writings inside. What inspired them? What daily routines guided their hands as they copied these texts with such devotion? As the desert day wears on, more scholars arrive from around the world. They step off dusty vehicles with notebooks, magnifying tools, and quiet anticipation. Introductions are simple and warm. There is a shared sense of purpose among them, a gentle understanding that they are joining something larger than themselves. In the evenings, long discussions unfold around lanterns. The scholars exchange ideas about the meaning of specific passages, the identity of the Qumran community, and the relation between these scrolls and later traditions. Their debates are thoughtful, respectful, measured. They remind one another that these ancient texts carry voices, beliefs, and hopes that deserve careful listening. As night falls, the desert sky fills with stars. The cliffs glow faintly in the moonlight, their edges softened by darkness. Some scholars take quiet walks along the ridge, letting the cool air settle their thoughts. The Dead Sea reflects the faint shimmer of the sky, a silver surface stretching toward the horizon. Inside the shelter, a few researchers remain awake, reviewing fragments illuminated by small lamps. They number each piece, trace each letter, and document each stroke. Their movements are slow, almost meditative. At times they pause simply to breathe and listen to the soft rustling of the desert wind. Over the next weeks, preparations continue for transferring a selection of scrolls to laboratories with more advanced tools. Infrared imaging will reveal faded letters. Microscopic analysis will identify ink composition. Chemical testing will help determine the type of parchment. These methods promise deeper insight, but they also require delicate handling of the fragile material. International scholars gather in Jerusalem to discuss how best to coordinate the work. The conversations remain calm, though some disagreements persist. A small group argues that access should be limited to protect the scrolls from misinterpretation or damage. Others advocate for broader, transparent study. In the middle, quiet voices call for patience, reminding everyone of the scroll's fragility and the need for unity. As the scrolls arrive at the museum carried in specially designed cases, curators greet them with reverent care. Rooms are prepared with temperature-controlled cabinets, soft lighting, and non-reactive materials. The moment the first scroll is placed under secure glass, a soft quiet fills the room. Everyone present feels the weight of history settling gently around them. Back at Qumran, the desert maintains its timeless rhythm. Faint winds move across the cliffs. Birds rest in the shade of small shrubs. The scholars continue cataloging fragments, always with the same slow, peaceful consistency. Some spend hours on a single line of text, tracing the faded ink, comparing it to others, piecing together meanings that have slept for centuries. One afternoon, a young scholar finds a fragment containing a short prayer. The words speak of gratitude for light, for learning, and for the ability to reflect. The scholar reads the lines aloud, her voice quiet and steady. The group listens with stillness. For a moment, time seems to pause. The ancient prayer settles into the warm air like a soft breath, connecting past and present with delicate ease. In the weeks that follow, the research evolves. Teams work both at Qumran and in Jerusalem, coordinating their findings. New interpretations emerge slowly, like dawn spreading across the desert. Each revelation is met not with excitement, but with calm contemplation. The scholars understand that this is not a race. It is a long, gentle unfolding of understanding. As another evening arrives, lanterns glow again inside the caves and tents. Soft shadows dance along the stone walls. The desert hums with night sounds, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the faint shifting of sand. The scholars sit quietly, reviewing the progress of the day. Some reflect on the incredible journey of these scrolls, from the hands of ancient scribes to the cliffs of Qumran to the modern world. Others think about the responsibility of preserving them for future generations. And some simply enjoy the stillness, letting the peace of the desert settle around them like a gentle cloak. As the night deepens, you imagine yourself stepping out into the open desert. The stars overhead shimmer with quiet brilliance. The air is cool and steady. You breathe deeply, feeling the tranquility of the land, the weight of history, and the soft unfolding of discovery. The scrolls, resting safely under layers of careful protection, continue to share their gentle, ancient whispers with the world. Soft dawn light drifts across the desert again, settling gently on the cliffs and the quiet pathways leading toward the caves. The rhythm of the excavation has become a way of life. Each morning arrives with the same quiet promise. More fragments to understand, more history to uncover, more whispers from 2,000 years ago, waiting patiently to be heard. As the scholars gather in the early coolness, they carry an unspoken calm. Their movements are slow, deliberate, softened by weeks of working in harmony with the desert's quiet pace. The sun rests low on the horizon, painting the stone a gentle gold. Everything feels peaceful and steady. Today the team begins by examining notes sent from their colleagues in Jerusalem. Carefully wrapped envelopes arrive from laboratories where advanced imaging is uncovering details invisible to the naked eye. When the scholars open the newest set of photographs and reports, they do so as if revealing something sacred. Infrared scans have revealed letters once thought lost, faint strokes now visible, again after centuries of fading. Hidden marks emerge from the parchment like quiet voices returning from silence. The scholars lean close, comparing the newly visible characters to their earlier transcriptions. Slowly, new meanings come into focus. Some fragments connect in unexpected ways. Two pieces found in separate caves turn out to belong to the same scroll. The discovery brings soft murmurs of excitement, though still muted, gentle, respectful. They mark the new connection carefully, adding it to the growing mosaic of texts. Meanwhile, archaeologists continue studying the physical layout of the Qumran site. They examine rooms thought to be scriptoria spaces where scribes may have copied and stored their writings. Channels carved into the stone floor suggest water purification rituals. Shelves and benches hint at daily routines built around discipline, learning, and reflection. The scholars move between these spaces, trying to imagine the lives of those who lived here. They'd picture scribes dipping pens into ink, smoothing parchment across carved tables, working by the faint light of oil lamps. The rhythm would have been slow and steady, much like the quiet work unfolding today. As midday approaches, a warm stillness fills the desert. The team retreats into the shelter to avoid the heat. Inside, they study translations from earlier weeks, gently refining phrases, adjusting interpretations. Some texts reveal hymns, soft, poetic lines celebrating light, creation, and wisdom. Others contain narratives of struggle, hope, and the anticipation of renewal. Each line is handled with care. The scholars pause often, letting meanings settle. Sometimes they sit silently, simply absorbing the resonance of an ancient phrase. It feels as though each text carries a soft pulse, a delicate heartbeat from another age. Later in the afternoon, the team focuses on cataloging the growing archive. Scrolls and fragments must be labeled precisely. Cave number, material type, script style, approximate date. This administrative work is slow but essential. Every detail ensures that future generations can trace the path of each fragment with clarity. Outside, the desert remains calm. A light breeze sweeps across the landscape, carrying the faint scent of salt from the Dead Sea. Shadows shift along the cliffs, offering cool pockets of rest. The scholars step out occasionally to stretch, breathing in the warm, steady air. When they return inside, attention shifts to one of the most intriguing fragments, a text describing a teacher of righteousness, a figure who guided the community with wisdom and discipline. The scholars debate quietly, comparing interpretations. They do not seek dramatic conclusions. Rather, they aim for careful understanding. Even disagreements remain soft. Voices stay low. The desert seems to encourage gentleness in every conversation. As evening nears, the sky turns pale rose and lavender. Lanterns are lit once again. Inside the shelter, the scholars gather for their nightly review. Pages of notes lie in soft piles. Photographs are arranged in careful rows. They speak slowly, sharing observations gathered throughout the day. One scholar reads a calming passage from a recently restored scroll, a meditation on inner peace, describing the value of quietness and reflection. The words feel timeless. They resonate deeply in the hush of the desert evening. Everyone listens without interruption, letting the ancient wisdom drift through the air like a soft breeze. Outside, the night grows cooler. Stars emerge overhead, bright, unwavering. The Dead Sea reflects the faint glow, appearing like a pool of molten silver beneath the sky. A calm settles over the entire region, wrapping around the site, the scholars, and the silent caves. In the following days, the work expands further. Additional experts arrive to study specific aspects of the scroll's textile, specialists to examine parchment, chemists to analyze ink, linguists to compare dialects, historians to interpret. Each new expert listens first, learning the slow rhythm of the site before contributing. Together, they create a gentle harmony of collaboration. Tools are shared, notes are exchanged. The desert becomes a quiet meeting place for minds deeply committed to careful understanding. At one point, a group gathers around a fragment containing a description of community meals. The lines speak of shared bread, silence before eating, and the steady presence of gratitude. The scholars take their time translating the passage, imagining the meals that once took place here simple, peaceful, filled with purpose. As days flow gently into weeks, the scrolls continue to reveal themselves piece by piece. Some fragments connect seamlessly. Others require long contemplation before finding their place. But every discovery, no matter how small, brings a soft sense of accomplishment, like fitting another stone into a quiet ancient mosaic. One evening, as the sun dips below the cliffs, the scholars step outside to watch the desert change color. The sky glows with gold and deep orange, then fades into the deepening blue of night. The wind carries a cool hush, brushing lightly across their faces. They stand in silence, feeling a quiet bond with the scribes who once lived in the same landscape, who looked up at the same sky, who wrote their thoughts with patient devotion. As darkness settles, lanterns glow softly in the caves and tents. Inside, work continues at a slow, peaceful pace. A scholar gently restores a delicate fragment, brushing away tiny grains of dust. Another writes notes in a careful hand. A third reads from a translated passage describing hope amid uncertainty. Their voices blend with the desert night, creating a serene chorus of past and present. The scrolls rest safely in their protective cases, watched over by those who cherish their fragile wisdom. You imagine standing among the scholars, feeling the calm of the desert all around you, listening to the soft rustle of parchment, the quiet murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of discovery. The night deepens. Shadows lengthen. The Dead Sea shines faintly, and the ancient words preserved for millennia continue to whisper gently into the world once more. The dawn settles quietly across the Judean Desert once more. The air is cool and soft, carrying faint hints of mineral salt from the Dead Sea. Light spills slowly over the cliffs, revealing their warm sandstone tones. The scholars rise gradually, moving through gentle morning routines, their breaths steady in the calm stillness. Another day of careful study begins. Inside the research shelter, lamps glow softly above the tables. Stacks of notes, magnifying lenses, and brushes rest exactly where they were left the night before. These small tools feel like companions, now reassuring, familiar, part of the slow rhythm of discovery. Today's work starts with a scroll that has puzzled the team for weeks. The text contains unusual phrasing, mixing poetic lines with strict rules. Some scholars believe it describes a ritual calendar. Others think it reflects symbolic teachings passed between members of the Qumran community. They gather around the fragment with respectful stillness, ready to listen once more to the voice hidden within the faded ink. As they read through lines of ancient Hebrew, their voices are low and calm. Every phrase is rolled gently across the tongue, inviting clarity. New interpretations arise slowly, not from sudden inspiration, but from quiet reflection. The scroll seems to reveal itself like a door opening slightly more each day, never rushed, never forced. Outside, the desert remains patient. The sun rises high, warming the cliffs in soft layers. A gentle breeze moves across the ground, stirring thin trails of dust that dance and settle again. The scholars occasionally step out for air, letting the warmth sink into their skin before returning to the cool shade inside the cave. By midday, the team shift to analyzing ink samples collected earlier in the week. A small group of specialists prepares thin slides, holding them beneath delicate instruments designed to detect mineral traces. The process reveals surprising details. Certain scrolls share identical ink compositions, suggesting they were written not only in the same era, but likely in the same workshop. This discovery sparks gentle conversation. The scholars imagine the scribes at work centuries ago, preparing ink in quiet, repetitive motions, grinding minerals, mixing them with water, testing consistency with care. The image feels peaceful, as though the scribes themselves worked with the same steady patience that fills the room now. Later in the afternoon, archaeologists revisit the caves to continue mapping their features. Cave 4 draws particular interest. Its irregular shape, broken shelves, and collapsed ceilings suggest it once held far more scrolls than originally found. The scholars walk slowly along the edges, brushing dust from small stones, examining cracks where fragments might still rest unseen. Though few new pieces emerge, the act of searching feels meaningful. Each movement honors the silent efforts of those who once stored their writings here, protecting them from harsh weather and roaming armies. As the day continues, a delivery arrives from Jerusalem, new infrared photographs showing faint lines on a parchment fragment previously considered blank. When the scholars examine the images, they see soft traces of letters beginning to emerge from the darkness. Excitement stirs gently, like ripples across a still pond. The team compares the new letters to known texts, gradually recognizing the opening words of a long-lost hymn. The moment brings warm smiles, though still quiet and contained. The desert seems to lean in, listening as the ancient lines are read aloud once more. The hymn expresses gratitude for the turning of seasons, the steady rhythm of day and night, and the soft presence of peace in simple routines. Its tone echoes the very atmosphere of the excavation, calm, patient, anchored in gentle awareness. In the following days, scholars from several countries arrive to join the study. They bring fresh insight into script styles, historical context, and linguistic analysis. The research tent becomes a peaceful gathering place for shared expertise. Each scholar speaks softly, understanding that this work thrives not on urgency, but on care. They gather each evening for quiet discussion. Lantern light glows across their faces as they exchange interpretations, comparing translations word by word. Sometimes they fall into long stretches of silence, thinking deeply, letting the ancient texts guide their thoughts. Meanwhile, progress continues on the cataloging effort. Every fragment is assigned a precise location within the growing archive. Soft linen folders hold fragile pieces. Smooth wooden trays support larger scrolls. Temperature and humidity are checked regularly, ensuring the scrolls remain safe. One afternoon, the team focuses on fragments believed to belong to a commentary explaining ancient scripture. The lines describe not only interpretations, but also reflections on humanity, kindness, and humility. As the scholars translate the passage, a sense of quiet warmth fills the room. Each line feels like a gentle reminder to move through the world with intention, to notice the smallest details, to act with integrity. The scholars pause often, sensing the timelessness of the message. Even after centuries buried in the desert, the wisdom resonates clearly. As sunset approaches, the researchers make their way to the ridge overlooking the Dead Sea. The light softens into hues of gold and rose, blending into soft purple as the sun dips lower. Shadows stretch across the cliffs, forming long, delicate ribbons of darkness. The scholars stand in quiet contemplation. Their minds are filled with the day's discoveries, yet the peacefulness of the desert holds everything gently. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels heavy. The land seems to breathe with them, slow and steady. When night arrives, the stars emerge in thousands, bright against the dark sky. The camp becomes a cluster of warm lanterns nestled within the vast stillness. Inside the research tent, a few scholars continue working late into the night, carefully aligning fragments, writing translations, or reviewing notes. Their movements are slow and careful. The pages rustle softly. Pens glide across paper. Occasionally, someone murmurs a gentle observation, and another responds in a whisper. Their collaboration feels almost like a meditation, patient, focused, grounded. Outside, the desert wind carries the faintest sound of shifting sand. The cliffs loom quietly, holding their ancient secrets. Somewhere nearby, the Dead Sea reflects the moonlight, steady and calm. In the final hours before sleep, the scholars gather once more to read from one of the scrolls restored earlier in the day. The passage describes the value of listening, of sitting in quiet reflection, of opening oneself to understanding without haste. The words feel perfectly suited to the stillness of the moment. You imagine sitting among them, the lantern's warm glow touching your face, the cool air brushing gently across your arms, the ancient words floating softly through the quiet night. The scholars close the text with reverence. They extinguish the lanterns one by one, and as they step out into the dark, star-filled desert, it feels as though time itself slows to a gentle breath, the same breath carried across centuries by the scrolls resting safely within their care. The weeks following the first confirmed scholarly translations brought a steady, quiet rhythm to the desert camps. Each morning came gently, with pale sunlight stretching across the stone cliffs, warming the scattered tents and work tables. The researchers rose slowly, settling into their tasks with the same calm energy that had carried them since the beginning of the excavations. At one of the long wooden tables, fragments from Cave 1 lay arranged in thoughtful rows. The scholars approached them with soft movements, adjusting the pieces just slightly, testing how different curves and edges might align. The work resembled a puzzle, but one with no guarantee that every piece still existed. Yet this uncertainty didn't bring frustration. Instead, it invited patience. A soft breeze moved through the camp, whispering across canvas walls. The sound blended with the faint brushing of tools and the murmur of quiet conversations. Every voice stayed low, as though each person felt instinctively that the scrolls settled better in silence. In the distance, the path leading up to the caves shimmered in the early light. Workers began their climb, following familiar routes along the rock face. Their steps were slow and steady, the same deliberate pace used every day to protect both themselves and any delicate artifacts hidden within the caves. Inside Cave 1, the air held a cool stillness. Dust particles drifted in the shafts of light that filtered through small openings in the ceiling. The workers had already cleared most of the loose debris, but they continued their careful examination, scanning each crevice and shadowed corner. Even a pebble out of place could indicate a jar that had shattered long ago. Some team members focused on mapping the cave's interior, a thoughtful, meditative process. They traced contours of the walls, measured distances between shelves of stone, and documented every feature with gentle thoroughness. These maps would help scholars understand how the scrolls had been stored, arranged, and protected when they were first placed here centuries earlier. Meanwhile, down on the valley floor, the scholars handling the larger scrolls continued their delicate routine. One group focused on the community rule, slowly unrolling it millimeter by millimeter. The parchment made faint, crisp sounds as it expanded, sounds reminiscent of old leaves shifting underfoot. The script revealed itself in thin, graceful strokes, each letter shaped with intention. The more the scholars read, the clearer the sense of the ancient writers became. Their words spoke of discipline, ritual, shared meals, evening gatherings, and moments of quiet reflection. The scroll described how members of the community should greet one another, how they should settle disputes, and how they should live with integrity. Each new line painted a picture of a people who valued order, devotion, and deep simplicity. Nearby, another table held fragments of the war scroll. Even these pieces felt strangely peaceful in the quiet setting. The text described a final struggle between forces of light and darkness, a symbolic battle, perhaps, or a vision shaped by hardship. Yet the scholars didn't rush to interpret. They studied every curve of ink without judgment, letting the words rest gently in their understanding. One of the more challenging tasks involved identifying the origins of each fragment. The scholars compared parchment thickness, writing style, and fiber patterns, grouping pieces based on subtle similarities. They used magnifying lenses to study ink composition and surface texture. With each discovery, excitement flickered softly across their faces, like warm embers glowing beneath calm breaths. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting bright light across the desert. Workers who had returned from the caves moved through the camp with quiet purpose. Some carried small cloth-wrapped bundles, fragments, stones, pottery. Each item was placed onto tables with steady hands, ready for examination. Occasionally, the quiet routine was interrupted by moments of discovery. A worker might uncover a scrap of parchment lodged between stones. A scholar might discover that two seemingly unrelated fragments aligned perfectly. These small triumphs brought soft smiles and gentle exchanges of recognition, but the calm atmosphere never broke. As the day warmed, some scholars stepped outside for short breaks. They walked slowly along the edge of the cliffs, gazing at the vast openness stretching before them. The desert seemed timeless, its silence stretching from horizon to horizon. It was easy to imagine the ancient community living here, walking similar paths, feeling the same sun and wind, writing the very scrolls now resting in careful hands. By afternoon, the camp settled into its familiar rhythm once more. Lamps were placed in shaded areas for better visibility. Water jugs were refilled. Quiet discussions continued about the connections between certain texts, how some passages echoed biblical books, while others expanded upon them with new interpretations or community rules. One scholar sat reading a newly translated column from the Isaiah scroll. His eyes moved slowly across the lines, savoring the ancient poetry. Even the familiar passages felt different here, as though the desert had given them new depth. He whispered the words aloud, letting them flow gently through the still air. The sound blended with the soft rustling of parchment nearby. As shadows lengthened, the camp grew cooler. Workers returned from the cliffs, their faces brushed with dust and sunlight. They washed their hands at basins placed near the tents, preparing to join the evening tasks. Some sat quietly, watching the sky turn amber and rose. Others reviewed notes taken during the day, organizing each detail before nightfall. When darkness settled, the camp lights flickered softly, casting warm, golden circles across the ground. The scholars continued their work under these gentle glows, their voices low and steady. The night felt peaceful, wrapped in the same deep quiet that had preserved the scrolls for centuries. Near the central tent, a scholar carefully placed a newly translated fragment into its protective case. He paused for a long moment, taking a slow breath as he looked at the fragile parchment. It was humbling to hold something so old, so delicate, and yet so full of meaning. The scrolls seemed to speak not just through their words, but through their survival. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, shimmering above the cliffs. The desert air cooled, carrying soft breezes that rustled through the sparse brush. The camp settled into a gentle stillness. Even the faint sounds of movement felt like part of a larger, tranquil rhythm. And as the final lamps dimmed, a quiet sense of continuity filled the camp, an unspoken understanding that the work would resume in the morning with the same calm dedication, the same slow patience, and the same reverence for the fragile voices of the past. The weeks following the first confirmed scholarly translations brought a steady, quiet rhythm to the desert camps. Each morning came gently, with pale sunlight stretching across the stone cliffs, warming the scattered tents and work tables. The researchers rose slowly, settling into their tasks with the same calm energy that had carried them since the beginning of the excavations. At one of the long wooden tables, fragments from Cave 1 lay arranged in thoughtful rows. The scholars approached them with soft movements, adjusting the pieces just slightly, testing how different curves and edges might align. The work resembled a puzzle, but one with no guarantee that every piece still existed. Yet this uncertainty didn't bring frustration. Instead, it invited patience. A soft breeze moved through the camp, whispering across canvas walls. The sound blended with the faint brushing of tools and the murmur of quiet conversations. Every voice stayed low, as though each person felt instinctively that the scrolls settled better in silence. In the distance, the path leading up to the caves shimmered in the early light. Workers began their climb, following familiar routes along the rock face. Their steps were slow and steady, the same deliberate pace used every day to protect both themselves and any delicate artifacts hidden within the caves. Inside Cave 1, the air held a cool stillness. Dust particles drifted in the shafts of light that filtered through small openings in the ceiling. The workers had already cleared most of the loose debris, but they continued their careful examination, scanning each crevice and shadowed corner. Even a pebble out of place could indicate a jar that had shattered long ago. Some team members focused on mapping the cave's interior, a thoughtful, meditative process. They traced contours of the walls, measured distances between shelves of stone, and documented every feature with gentle thoroughness. These maps would help scholars understand how the scrolls had been stored, arranged, and protected when they were first placed here centuries earlier. Meanwhile, down on the valley floor, the scholars handling the larger scrolls continued their delicate routine. One group focused on the community rule, slowly unrolling it millimeter by millimeter. The parchment made faint, crisp sounds as it expanded, sounds reminiscent of old leaves shifting underfoot. The script revealed itself in thin, graceful strokes, each letter shaped with intention. The more the scholars read, the clearer the sense of the ancient writers became. Their words spoke of discipline, ritual, shared meals, evening gatherings, and moments of quiet reflection. The scroll described how members of the community should greet one another, how they should settle disputes, and how they should live with integrity. Each new line painted a picture of a people who valued order, devotion, and deep simplicity. Nearby, another table held fragments of the war scroll. Even these pieces felt strangely peaceful in the quiet setting. The text described a final struggle between forces of light and darkness, a symbolic battle, perhaps, or a vision shaped by hardship. Yet the scholars didn't rush to interpret. They studied every curve of ink without judgment, letting the words rest gently in their understanding. One of the more challenging tasks involved identifying the origins of each fragment. The scholars compared parchment thickness, writing style, and fiber patterns, grouping pieces based on subtle similarities. They used magnifying lenses to study ink composition and surface texture. With each discovery, excitement flickered softly across their faces, like warm embers glowing beneath calm breaths. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting bright light across the desert. Workers who had returned from the caves moved through the camp with quiet purpose. Some carried small cloth-wrapped bundles, fragments, stones, pottery. Each item was placed onto tables with steady hands, ready for examination. Occasionally, the quiet routine was interrupted by moments of discovery. A worker might uncover a scrap of parchment lodged between stones. A scholar might discover that two seemingly unrelated fragments aligned perfectly. These small triumphs brought soft smiles and gentle exchanges of recognition, but the calm atmosphere never broke. As the day warmed, some scholars stepped outside for short breaks. They walked slowly along the edge of the cliffs, gazing at the vast openness stretching before them. The desert seemed timeless, its silence stretching from horizon to horizon. It was easy to imagine the ancient community living here, walking similar paths, feeling the same sun and wind, writing the very scrolls now resting in careful hands. By afternoon, the camp settled into its familiar rhythm once more. Lamps were placed in shaded areas for better visibility. Water jugs were refilled. Quiet discussions continued about the connections between certain texts, how some passages echoed biblical books, while others expanded upon them with new interpretations or community rules. One scholar sat reading a newly translated column from the Isaiah scroll. His eyes moved slowly across the lines, savoring the ancient poetry. Even the familiar passages felt different here, as though the desert had given them new depth. He whispered the words aloud, letting them flow gently through the still air. The sound blended with the soft rustling of parchment nearby. As shadows lengthened, the camp grew cooler. Workers returned from the cliffs, their faces brushed with dust and sunlight. They washed their hands at basins placed near the tents, preparing to join the evening tasks. Some sat quietly, watching the sky turn amber and rose. Others reviewed notes taken during the day, organizing each detail before nightfall. When darkness settled, the camp lights flickered softly, casting warm, golden circles across the ground. The scholars continued their work under these gentle glows, their voices low and steady. The night felt peaceful, wrapped in the same deep quiet that had preserved the scrolls for centuries. Near the central tent, a scholar carefully placed a newly translated fragment into its protective case. He paused for a long moment, taking a slow breath as he looked at the fragile parchment. It was humbling to hold something so old, so delicate, and yet so full of meaning. The scrolls seemed to speak not just through their words, but through their survival. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, shimmering above the cliffs. The desert air cooled, carrying soft breezes that rustled through the sparse brush. The camp settled into a gentle stillness. Even the faint sounds of movement felt like part of a larger, tranquil rhythm. And as the final lamps dimmed, a quiet sense of continuity filled the camp, an unspoken understanding that the work would resume in the morning with the same calm dedication, the same slow patience, and the same reverence for the fragile voices of the past. The early months of direct scholarly involvement brought a new rhythm to the desert. What had begun with the quiet discoveries of Bedouin shepherds, and later with the cautious steps of archaeologists moving through dim caves, now expanded into something larger. Yet the tone remained soft and steady, shaped by the environment itself. The desert had a way of slowing every movement, inviting patience at each turn. Morning light stretched across the Judean cliffs, long and pale, settling over the tents and wooden tables where scholars worked. The scroll fragments were kept in shaded areas, carefully laid out on low surfaces, each piece positioned with delicate tools. Brushes, small tweezers, thin picks, and sheets of parchment were arranged in an orderly, almost meditative pattern. Nothing about the process could be rushed. The slightest twist of a wrist could create cracks. Even a breath too close could shift fibers that had survived 2 millennia of silence. The scholars often spoke in whispers, not because they didn't want to disturb one another, but because the scrolls themselves felt like they deserved a quiet atmosphere. Many described the experience as reverent, like standing inside a place of worship. The air smelled faintly of dust, warmed by the sun, mingled with the subtle aroma of old leather that had traveled through time to reach them. As the days unfolded, teams began cataloging fragments from Cave 1 with greater accuracy. Some pieces were small, no larger than a fingernail, while others were broad sheets capable of holding entire columns of text. The most significant scrolls, the ones discovered intact or nearly so, were still the focus of great excitement. The Isaiah scroll in particular drew long, thoughtful gazes. Its clarity, its completeness, and its age made it unlike anything researchers had expected to find. Nearby, another team worked on the Thanksgiving hymns, a collection of poetic writings filled with gratitude, humility, and introspective devotion. Each verse carried a sense of personal reflection, as if written by individuals who had stepped away from the noise of the world to seek stillness in their own hearts. The script flowed with an elegant rhythm that translated even through fragile parchment fibers. In the growing cluster of research activity, some scholars focused on paleography, the study of ancient handwriting styles. They compared the shapes of letters, the lengths of strokes, and the angles of each line. Through these comparisons, they began identifying groups of scribes who had likely written the scrolls. Some hands were bold and wide. Others were narrow, precise, and almost delicate. Each scribe seemed to carry a voice of their own, preserved through the subtle movements of ink and brush. Meanwhile, in the quiet hours before midday, excavation teams ventured deeper into the cliffs around Qumran. Their steps echoed softly against warm stone, mixing with the occasional sound of wind rushing past narrow passages. Caves that had once seemed unreachable were now carefully approached with ropes and wooden ladders. The teams moved slowly, not only because of the difficulty of the terrain, but because each new space carried the possibility of discovery. Some caves yielded broken jars. Others held only traces of habitation ash from long-dead fires, pottery fragments, and smooth stones that might once have lined storage pits. Even the caves without scrolls held value. They helped archaeologists map the habits and movement patterns of the people who had lived or worked in this region. Every small detail contributed to a growing picture of the past. But occasionally, the desert reminded them how unpredictable it could be. Winds shifted suddenly, blowing dust across pathways. Shadows changed quickly as clouds drifted overhead. The temperature rose and fell with startling speed. Despite these challenges, the atmosphere remained soothing in its consistency. The desert seemed to move with its own ancient rhythm, inviting those who walked through it to move gently as well. As weeks turned into months, the caretakers of the scrolls began relocating some fragments to controlled environments in nearby cities. This created a slow, bittersweet moment for the researchers still living near the caves. They watched carts and vehicles carrying sealed cases away from the desert, toward labs with tools capable of preserving the scrolls more reliably. There was comfort in knowing the work would continue, yet a part of them cherished the quiet simplicity of studying the scrolls in the very landscape that had sheltered them. Still, the excavations pressed forward. At a new cave entrance, partly obscured by fallen stone, workers uncovered additional jars, sealed with hardened lids. Even unopened, the sight of them created a hush across the team. It was impossible to guess what they held until the seals could be safely removed. Some jars might contain scrolls. Others might hold nothing more than dust. But the possibility alone brought renewed energy. Under a makeshift canopy, specialists prepared to open the jars. They used soft tools, applying minimal pressure, allowing the ancient clay to release its grip slowly. The lids came free with small, gentle taps. Inside, layers of linen still held shape, though fragile and faint. Sometimes these linens wrapped scrolls. Other times they wrapped empty air evidence of items removed long before. In one jar, a tightly wound scroll emerged, still bound by a strip of leather that had grown brittle with age. Its surface bore faint lines of writing, just visible when angled toward the light. The scholars moved it immediately to a shaded area, placing it on a wooden board covered in soft fabric. Even the movement from jar to table was performed in a slow, synchronized manner, as if the entire team shared the same breath. Hours passed as the scroll settled into its new environment. Small fragments loosened, falling gently onto the fabric like thin feathers. Every piece mattered. Each fragment could connect to an existing text or reveal something entirely new. The atmosphere in the tent grew quiet again, filled only with the low rustle of parchment being arranged. Meanwhile, at the same site, another team uncovered fragments from a different cave, small pieces with faint writing that appeared to belong to commentaries or interpretations of biblical books. These fragments suggested that the community associated with the scrolls had not only copied sacred texts, but also reflected on them deeply, creating guided explanations for future readers. Across the camp, researchers recorded each new finding with slow, deliberate precision. Measurements were noted, descriptions were written, and each entry was placed into evolving catalogs, carefully cross-referenced with earlier discoveries. Nothing was left to guesswork. The entire process followed a patient, steady rhythm, mirroring the script of the landscape itself. Evening settled quietly over the desert. The heat softened. The sky shifted from pale blue to deep gold, then to a muted violet that stretched across the horizon. Lamps were lit around the camp, their warm glow creating small islands of light against the expansive dusk. Conversations drifted softly between tents. Some scholars read sections of text aloud in low voices, testing translations, feeling the cadence of the ancient language. Others stepped outside to breathe in the evening air. They looked toward the caves that dotted the cliffside, their openings dark and still against dim starlight. Many felt a sense of companionship with the place and unspoken connection to those who had written and hidden the scrolls long ago. The quiet moments at night felt almost suspended in time. A few sat near the edge of the cliffs, listening to the soft whistle of wind weaving between the stones. There was something grounding in the sound, something that carried the weight of thousands of years. The scrolls were not merely artifacts. They were voices preserved through silence, now gently awakening under careful hands. And as the moon rose over the desert, its pale light brushing lightly against the cliffs, the work continued steady, calm, and carried by the same patience that had guided every moment since the first jar was found. The quiet routine of the excavation settled into a familiar pattern, yet each day carried a soft sense of anticipation. Though the scholars and workers knew the desert well by now, the cliffs, the narrow paths, the shifting winds, there was always the quiet possibility that another discovery waited, just beyond the next ridge or beneath a thin layer. This sense of gentle expectation gave the camp a calm, steady energy. Morning arrived with soft golden light stretching across the stone, warming the tents and illuminating the maps pinned to rough wooden boards. A few early risers stepped outside, closing their eyes as a warm breeze brushed past. Even in its harshest seasons, the desert had a way of embracing anyone willing to move slowly enough to notice its quiet details. Inside one of the main work tents, several scholars gathered at a long table, reviewing the previous day's findings. They spoke in low tones, their voices steady and patient. Fragment by fragment, the scrolls were revealing themselves, not in sudden bursts, but in gentle, gradual understandings. A new phrase here, a poetic line there, An unfamiliar name, a repeated symbol, a variation in ink. Each piece mattered. Some scholars leaned over magnifying lenses, studying fibers and ink patterns. Others compared fragments to earlier catalog entries, checking handwriting styles, line spacing, and the texture of parchment. They worked like quiet caretakers, tending to something ancient and delicate, something that seemed to glow faintly with its own calm presence. Outside, workers prepared to revisit several caves deeper into the cliffs. The paths had grown familiar, but every ascent still required slow, deliberate footsteps. The stone surfaces could be smooth in some areas and unexpectedly rough in others. The workers used ropes, wooden poles, and steady teamwork to navigate the more challenging sections, communicating with simple hand motions to avoid disturbing loose rocks. One cave in particular had drawn renewed interest. It opened from the cliffside like a small, dark mouth shaded, silent, and untouched since the first survey weeks earlier. The initial searches had uncovered a few pottery shards, but nothing more. Yet the dust patterns along the floor suggested that something might lie beneath the scattered stones. When the workers arrived, they entered in quiet single file, their lamps flickering softly against the walls. The cave was cool, almost cold compared to the warmth outside. Every movement inside felt amplified, but the team kept their motions gentle, brushing dust aside with slow sweeps. For the first few minutes, they found nothing unusual. But near a deeper recess, one worker noticed the faint curve of a jar lid, just barely visible beneath a thin layer of sediment. He motioned for the others to gather, and soon they were clearing the area inch by inch. The lid emerged gradually, a smooth clay surface with a worn, rounded top. Beside it, a fragment of linen peeked through the dust. They exchanged calm glances, knowing the importance of what the jar might hold, yet maintaining the quiet pace that had become second nature. They called for the scholars, who arrived a short time later, their steps soft against the cave floor. The lead specialist knelt beside the jar, examining its position. The clay was brittle, and the surrounding stone was tight, so removing it would require slow, patient work. But he felt the familiar sense of reverence that came with every discovery. There was no rush. The scrolls had waited centuries. They could wait a little longer. Back at the camp, another group of scholars studied newly translated passages from the Thanksgiving hymns. The words described gratitude carved out of suffering, praise rising in quiet solitude, and a longing for purity of heart. The tone was introspective, gentle, almost whisper-like. Reading these verses in the desert created a stillness that echoed the text itself. One verse spoke of paths of silence and winds that carry truth. The scholars paused at those lines, glancing toward the tent's open flap where a breeze drifted through. The environment and the ancient text seemed intertwined, two calm presences speaking across time. At another table, researchers worked with fragments from a commentary on the Book of Habakkuk. This text was particularly valuable because it revealed how the community interpreted older writings, offering insight into their understanding of prophecy and moral life. The commentary blended direct quotations with reflections, creating a slow, thoughtful conversation between past and present. Scholars often whispered the lines as they worked. Speaking ancient words aloud gave them weight, a sense of texture and presence. The text flowed gently, each sentence unfolding like small ripples spreading across quiet water. Meanwhile, at the edges of the camp, workers sifted through soil gathered from several caves. Using fine screens and soft brushes, they searched for tiny fragments, shreds of parchment, bits of pottery, even grains of ink that might reveal writing. Sometimes the sifted materials held nothing more than sand and stone, but every so often a small, curled piece of parchment emerged, fragile and faint, carrying the whisper of a sentence long separated from its original scroll. These tiny discoveries brought a special kind of joy. They were like lost puzzle pieces suddenly resurfacing fragments that could fill gaps in larger texts, allowing scholars to form more complete narratives. Though small, each piece felt like a rediscovered breath of the ancient community. As midday approached, the desert warmed. Shadows shrank, and the air shimmered softly. Workers returned from the caves carrying crates padded with cloth, their faces careful and composed. The newly uncovered jar from the deep cave had been extracted successfully, still sealed, still wrapped in its linen. It would now rest in a shaded tent for slow, deliberate examination. The scholars gathered around the crate, pausing a moment before untying the straps. They lifted the jar gently, placing it on a table lined with soft cloth. Even the act of setting it down felt ceremonial. The weight of history seemed to gather around them, filling the tent with a quiet, steady presence. They began brushing away dust, revealing the clay surface in soft strokes. The jar's lid showed faint patterns, subtle marks that might indicate the jar's maker. The scholars took notes, sketched shapes, and whispered theories, but no conclusions were made. The desert had taught them that meaning came slowly. After stabilizing the jar, they allowed it to rest. Opening it too soon could cause sudden changes in humidity or temperature, risking the fragile contents inside. So they waited, letting the jar and the air adjust to one another. The patience felt natural now, almost soothing. The scrolls guided the pace. As afternoon light softened, some scholars took short breaks, walking in slow, thoughtful paths along the cliffs. The sound of their footsteps mixed with distant wind, creating a soft, steady rhythm. A few paused to observe the cave entrances, imagining the ancient community lowering jars into their hiding places, sealing them, and walking away with quiet purpose. In those moments, the scholars felt a gentle connection, a sense that the past was not gone, but simply resting beneath layers of time. Evening arrived slowly. The sky shifted from blue to warm gold, then to deep rose and violet. Lamps were lit around the camp, their soft glow bringing out the warm tones of parchment and stone. The scholars resumed their work with renewed calm, adjusting fragments, matching fibers, whispering careful translations. Near the main tent, the sealed jar sat untouched for the moment, resting under a protective cover. Its presence felt steady, patient, promising. The scholars moved around it with quiet reverence, as though respecting a sleeping voice waiting to speak. By nightfall, the camp settled into peaceful stillness. The stars emerged one by one, their soft light reflecting faintly off the desert floor. The wind cooled and slowed, brushing gently across the tents. Some scholars continued working by lamplight, while others rested, preparing for another calm day. And beneath the quiet of the desert night, the scrolls lay safe waiting to reveal, in their own slow rhythm, the stories they had carried through centuries of silence. The quiet flow of the excavation had become almost meditative for everyone involved. Each day carried its own gentle rhythm, shaped by the slow work of brushing dust from stone, aligning fragile fragments, and reading ancient lines that seemed to emerge from the silence itself. Even the wind, moving softly through the camp, felt as though it had settled into the steady pace of discovery. In the cool hours just before sunrise, a soft blue glow touched the tops of the cliffs. The camp stirred gradually. Lamps flickered out one by one as natural light filled the tents. Workers stretched their arms, moving slowly, easing into the day with quiet breaths. The desert was peaceful at this hour, as if holding its breath, watching over the work with a patient stillness. At one of the main tables, scholars gathered to review the progress made on the sealed jar discovered the previous afternoon. The jar rested under a soft canvas cover, adjusted to the surrounding temperature overnight. When the lead scholar lifted the edge of the cover, a sense of reverent anticipation passed through the tent. The clay surface looked slightly clearer now, freed from its dust, revealing subtle patterns and small marks worn smooth by time. They moved with extreme care, lifting the jar into a cradle padded with cloth. The process of opening it would take hours, perhaps longer, but no one rushed. The scholars breathed slowly, preparing themselves to follow the jar's lead. One specialist began by examining the surface again, searching for weak points or cracks. Another checked the humidity within the tent, adjusting it slightly to prevent sudden shifts. Everything was performed with slow, deliberate intention. While preparations continued, another group of scholars worked with fragments from a different cave. Spread out across several tables, these pieces contained lines of poetry, reflections, and prayers written in a graceful, flowing script. Many of the fragments were too small to reveal full sentences, yet they held a gentle beauty, a sense of calm devotion captured in every curve of ink. One scholar traced a finger just above the surface, careful not to touch the parchment. The fragment held a phrase translated roughly as, "In quiet paths, I find the whisper of wisdom." The words resonated deeply, especially here where the desert itself seemed to speak in soft, steady breaths. Nearby, researchers worked on pairing related fragments. They used magnifying lenses, studying stitch holes, fiber patterns, and the faintest traces of ink that had once connected lines of text. The work required a steady mind and a slow hand. Each time two fragments aligned perfectly, a quiet murmur spread across the tent, a soft acknowledgement of progress. Outside the tents, the workers traveled toward the more distant caves. Their steps pressed gently into the sand, leaving trails that cut across the pale morning ground. They moved in teams of 2 or 3, carrying ropes, brushes, and cloth-wrapped tools. The cliffs cast long shadows, creating cool corridors of shade where the workers paused to rest. At one cave, newly discovered during the previous week's survey, the team began clearing the entrance. Loose rocks had accumulated over time, forming a barrier that had to be removed slowly. As the workers shifted the stones, they uncovered a small alcove just inside the cave wall. The space was shallow, barely large enough for a single jar, yet its surface showed faint marks that looked like the impression of something once stored there. The workers brushed the alcove gently, revealing the outline more clearly. A scholar soon arrived, kneeling to study the marks. Though no jar remained, the shape suggested that the cave might once have held scrolls similar to those in Cave 1. Even the absence of the jar added to the growing map of ancient, Activity a reminder that the story extended beyond the few surviving artifacts. Back at camp, the sealed jar's lid was finally ready for removal. The scholars gathered closely, their movements slow, their breaths steady. The specialist handling the lid used a thin wooden wedge, easing it beneath the rim millimeter by millimeter. The clay resisted at first, then softened gradually, giving way to careful pressure. A soft crack sounded gentle and controlled as the seal loosened. The lid lifted with a slow, deliberate motion. Beneath it, layers of linen rested in quiet folds, still holding their shape after centuries. The scholars exchanged quiet glances, humbled by the sight. The linen was brittle, but intact enough to suggest that its contents had been well protected. A faint scent rose from the jar, earthy and ancient, like dry stone touched by time. The linen was not unfolded immediately. Instead, the scholars waited again, allowing the material to acclimate to the open air. The patients felt almost ceremonial. No one hurried. They stood around the jar in silence, listening to the soft movements of the desert outside. Meanwhile, in the central tent, another scholar read aloud from a nearly reconstructed hymn. The words described a longing for clarity, a reaching toward light from deep places of solitude. The cadence of the lines created a gentle rhythm, matching the soft scrape of brushes and the quiet shifting of parchment around the room. The reading drew several listeners, who gathered at a respectful distance. Each line seemed to settle into the peaceful atmosphere, adding depth to the quiet work of the day. The scholar's voice was soft, barely above a whisper, yet the words felt rich and steady. As afternoon light filled the camp, the scholars returned to the sealed jar. The lead specialist used small wooden tools to lift the linen layers one at a time. Each fold revealed more of the scroll within a tightly wound parchment, darker in tone than many others, its edges cracked, but still holding together. When the scroll was finally exposed, the tent grew even quieter. The parchment carried faint lines of ink, visible only at certain angles. The scroll was not opened immediately. Instead, it was placed on a flat, padded board, where it would rest until specialists could stabilize it. Even in its untouched state, the scroll felt extraordinary, another voice from the ancient community, resting now in the hands of those who could give it space to breathe again. Outside, the day began to cool. Shadows stretched long across the ground. Workers returned from the caves, their faces calm and thoughtful. The quiet sense of progress carried through the camp like a soft, steady current. As evening settled, the scholars gathered near the central tent to share gentle updates from the day. They spoke slowly, describing new fragments, newly aligned pieces, and the early impressions of the sealed jar's scroll. Their voices blended with the soft rustle of night air. The sky deepened into violet, then into the soft black of desert night. Stars appeared one by one, shimmering quietly above the cliffs. Lamps glowed warm and low, casting golden circles around the tents. And as the camp rested under the cool night sky, the scrolls lay safely in their protective spaces, fragile, ancient, and alive with the quiet presence of a world long gone, carried forward through the patient hands of those who listened. The night passed quietly over the desert, wrapping the camp in a gentle stillness. By dawn, the first light returned with its familiar softness, spreading across the cliffs like a slow, warm breath. The scholars woke gradually, stepping out of their tents into the cool morning air. Their movements were unhurried, shaped by the same slow rhythm that had guided the excavation for weeks. In the main work tent, the newly uncovered scroll from the sealed jar rested on its padded board. The parchment had settled overnight, its surface slightly more relaxed, the fibers less taut. The specialists approached it with quiet steps, inspecting the edges, noting subtle shifts in tone and texture. They moved with a calm precision, speaking only in gentle whispers. One scholar checked the humidity inside the tent, adjusting it with small, thoughtful motions. Another prepared fine brushes and soft cloths, placing them neatly beside the board. The process of opening the scroll would begin soon, but only when the parchment signaled its readiness, its fibers relaxed enough not to crack under the slightest movement. Outside, the sun climbed gently, illuminating a team heading toward one of the more distant caves. The path wound along a narrow ridge, shaded in some places by overhanging rock. The workers walked steadily, their tools secured in cloth wraps to prevent any sharp jostling. They paused often, listening to the faint hum of wind moving through crevices. When they reached the cave, they found the interior cool and quiet. Dust lay in thin layers across the stone floor, untouched since their last visit. They resumed their careful work, brushing, clearing, documenting. Every gesture was soft and deliberate, like moving through a sacred space. A worker near the back of the cave noticed something unusual in area where the dust settled differently, forming uneven patterns. With gentle brushes he cleared the surface, revealing a shallow depression in the stone. Inside the depression lay a cluster of small, curled fragments, fragile as dried leaves. He motioned quietly for the others. The scholars arrived minutes later, kneeling beside the newly exposed fragments. They did not touch them immediately. Instead, they studied the arrangement, noting the shapes, the distribution, the faint traces of ink visible on some of the pieces. Even tiny fragments could belong to important texts. They prepared soft trays and lifted each piece with slow, steady hands. Back in the camp, the fragments were placed in low wooden boxes lined with fabric. Scholars began examining them under magnification, adjusting lamps to find the angles at which the ink appeared. Some fragments bore only a few letters. Others contained partial lines. A few held enough continuity to reveal connections to earlier finds. One fragment carried the faint outline of a phrase that resembled a passage from an existing hymn. Another appeared to match a commentary fragment found weeks earlier. Each discovery brought soft murmurs of recognition, quiet notes of progress, shared between the scholars. Meanwhile, attention returned to the sealed jar's scroll. The specialist gently touched the outer surface with the softest brush, testing its readiness. The parchment felt steady now, prepared for careful unfolding. He began by loosening the outer layers, using fine wooden tools to ease apart edges that had settled together over centuries. The scroll responded slowly, releasing tiny particles of dust that drifted softly into the air. The scholars waited for each movement to finish before proceeding. The unfolding resembled the opening of a delicate flower, each layer revealing a little more of the intricate text hidden within. As the scroll unfurled gradually, the first column of writing became visible. The ink was faded but still readable in the right light. Thin, steady strokes formed letters that carried a gentle elegance, lines shaped by a scribe who had written with intention and care. The scholars leaned in with quiet reverence, their eyes following the slow reveal. The text appeared to be a devotional work, a reflection on purity, humility, and the search for inner clarity. It carried a soft, contemplative tone, similar to the Thanksgiving hymns but distinct in its structure. The scholars exchanged calm glances, sensing the scroll's significance. It was not only ancient, it was deeply personal, a window into the inner life of its writer. Throughout the day, the scroll continued to unfold. Each newly exposed section added clarity to the whole, though some parts remained too fragile to reveal fully. The scholars documented each visible line carefully, sketching shapes, noting faded strokes, and photographing the parchment from several angles. Nearby, another group of researchers analyzed fragments from the war scroll. They compared newly discovered pieces against earlier transcriptions, aligning edges that fit like soft puzzle pieces. The process brought a sense of quiet satisfaction, a feeling similar to placing stones together to reconstruct an ancient path. One scholar paused over a line describing the armor of the Sons of Light. Even though the text concerned conflict, the atmosphere remained peaceful. The desert seemed to soften everything. The words, the scholars' movements, the sense of time itself. As afternoon warmth settled over the camp, some scholars stepped out to rest beneath shaded awnings. They drank water slowly, watching the desert stretch into the distance. The horizon wavered softly in the heat, dissolving into pale blues and golds. A few workers napped briefly in the shade, lying still with hats over their faces. The desert moved gently around them. A breeze passed through, carrying faint scents of dry stone and warm earth. Birds circled high above the cliffs, their shadows drifting silently across the ground. Later in the afternoon, a new discovery brought quiet excitement. A well-preserved parchment fragment revealed several lines from a text previously unknown, something poetic and reflective. The scholars read the first translated words aloud in soft tones. From silence comes understanding, and from solitude, truth reveals its path. The lines seem to echo the atmosphere of the camp itself, its steady quiet, its patient movements, its gentle pursuit of meaning. Several scholars paused, feeling the resonance of the words. As evening approached, the desert cooled. Shadows lengthened across the ground, turning the cliffs a soft amber. Workers returned from the caves, carrying tools and trays of fragments. Their pace was relaxed, guided by the calm of the day. In the main tent, the newly unfolded scroll rested safely under its protective cloth. The scholars recorded the day's progress, sketching details, organizing notes, and preparing plans for the next steps. Their voices remained quiet, their movements unhurried. When night fell, the camp glowed softly with warm lamplight. The stars emerged slowly, shimmer by shimmer, filling the sky with a gentle brilliance. The air grew cool and still. The desert held a deep peace, as though sinking into a long, slow breath, and the scrolls, ancient, fragile, and full of quiet meaning, rested in their protective spaces, waiting for the next day's soft unfolding, the next careful breath, the next peaceful moment of discovery. The morning rose softly over the Judean Desert, spreading pale gold light across cliffs and tents alike. The camp, now quiet with the steady rhythm of work, seemed suspended in a gentle stillness. Scholars moved slowly among the tables, preparing the final steps of their careful documentation. The scrolls, some recently unsealed, others painstakingly reconstructed, lay before them, each fragile piece resting safely in padded supports, illuminated by soft lamplight. The sealed jars, now opened, revealed scrolls that had traveled through 2,000 years of silence. Each fragment had been touched, measured, and catalogued. Columns of text, some poetic, some instructive, some deeply reflective, had been carefully transcribed. The scholars paused often, letting the words breathe, allowing the wisdom of the ancient writers to settle around them. There was a quiet reverence in the air, a sense that time itself had slowed to accommodate the unfolding of these fragile voices. Outside, the desert carried its own gentle rhythm. The wind whispered softly through narrow stone passes, brushing over the cliffs like a careful breath. Dust rose in tiny, slow-moving clouds, settling again without haste. In the distance, the faint outline of the caves reminded the researchers of the centuries they had traversed without leaving their chairs. Each discovery, every fragment, had been a step closer to understanding not only the texts, but the lives of the people who had once hidden them away. The scholars gathered one last time around the central table. The unsealed scroll rested at the center, its surface smooth now, its delicate lines of ink fully revealed. They spoke in whispers, sharing final observations, linking fragments, reflecting on the community that had produced these writings. It was not just academic curiosity that held them here, but a quiet empathy. They felt the care with which the ancient scribes had copied, preserved and protected these words, a care that now echoed back through time. One scholar traced a finger over a column of text, the brush of her hand never touching the parchment. She read aloud softly, "In silence we find truth. In patience we are made whole, and in quiet devotion the spirit endures." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear or excitement, but with the calm awe of connection, a bridge across millennia. Outside, the last of the workers returned from the cliffs. Their steps were slow, measured, as if the desert itself had instructed them to move gently. They carried no more jars, no new fragments today. There was only the quiet completion of a journey that had begun long before they had arrived. They paused at the edge of the camp, watching the sun dip low, turning cliffs and tents to soft shades of amber and rose. The desert seemed to exhale, releasing the weight of centuries into the cooling air. In the evening, the camp gathered one final time under the soft lamplight. Scrolls rested in protective covers. Catalogues were finalized, photographs and sketches stored safely. Scholars spoke in hushed tones about what had been learned, about how each fragment revealed not only scripture, rules, or hymns, but also the human desire for order, devotion, and reflection. There was a shared understanding that some questions would remain forever unanswered, and that was part of the beauty of the story. The stars emerged slowly above the cliffs. Pale points of light reflected faintly on the desert floor. The wind carried a soft, cool hush. Shadows stretched long and quiet, merging with the outlines of jars, tents, and cliffs. The scholars and workers alike paused to look upward, feeling the stillness, feeling the connection to all that had come before. And then, with gentle steps and soft gestures, the camp settled into night. Lamps dimmed, voices quieted, and the scrolls rested fully in their protective spaces. The desert held them with care, as it had held the scrolls for thousands of years. Time seemed to pause, honoring the completion of a patient, reverent journey. The Dead Sea Scrolls, once hidden in shadowed caves, now stood revealed not fully, for some fragments would forever remain mysteries, but enough to whisper across the centuries. Their story ended not with fanfare, but with quiet understanding, the gentle acknowledgement of devotion preserved through time. And in the stillness under the wide desert sky, the scholars felt a deep sense of peace. The work was done. The scrolls slept once more, their voices carried gently by the wind, their lessons whispered softly in the rustle of parchment, the sigh of stone, and the enduring calm of the Judean Desert. And so the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls concluded not with a rush, not with certainty, but with quiet patience, reverence, and a lasting, gentle presence that would continue to resonate long after the desert had swallowed the last footsteps of the camp.